So Borderlands 4 is seemingly going to share a lot of similar elements to previous Borderlands games, but one of the areas they're switching up the mold is in their world design, and a bit more specifically in the mechanics of their world and how you're going to go about exploring it and how you're going to go about just general gameplay. Because it's seeming like Borderlands is going to have a seamless open world, something pretty similar to just a full open world game. Now, I do want to make note that the developers have been pretty specific in not wanting to call Borderlands 4 an open world. They have been calling it more specifically a seamless world. And we'll get more into that as we go through these interviews, but I do think it is quite interesting and is going to be a pretty massive change compared to all of the previous Borderlands games. Now, before we get into these interviews, there's one part of the Borderlands trailer that is mentioned a lot in all of these interviews, and this is the part of the trailer where three of our Vault Hunters are kind of walking up a hill, and they get over the hill, and there's this massive vista that just shows this massive area. It has the big cracked moon in the sky. It has a big city in the distance. It has all of these forest areas before that, and it's just a massive vista. And normally, a vista like this in Borderlands and a lot of other games would not be fully playable. There would just be background areas. In a lot of previous Borderlands games, you would go up to like one of these areas you see in the distance and it just wouldn't be playable space. And that's one of the big things they talk about in a lot of these interviews. So just keep this image in mind. So first off, we have a GameSpot interview that they did with Randy Pitchford and I think a handful of other Borderlands 4 developers. And this first paragraph I wanted to highlight sets the stage for all of this other information. So he goes on to say, with Borderlands 3, with the idea of going to different planets was more compartmentalized. So in Borderlands 3, you go to all of the different planets instead of staying on one. And with that, you have to do a loading screen to go to different planets. And then you have to do loading screens to go to different areas within those planets. And he goes on to say, it felt a little less open and free. Borderlands 4 is the most open and free ever for the Borderlands franchise. And this has also been confirmed in other interviews where they do say Borderlands 4 is not going to be in different areas. It's going to be one area. It's going to take place on one planet. And then he goes on to describe the part of the trailer that we already went over. Remember that image with the big vista, the city on it, and the moon in it as well. And he says, now when you look at this scene in the trailer, you can see these characters looking out at a vista. In every other game you've played, that's a backdrop. In Borderlands 4, everything you are seeing is a playable space that you can get to and reach without a load time. So I think one of the big things he's describing there is in that part of the trailer, in that massive vista, everything you can literally see in that big vista, in that trailer, you can explore to, and there will not be a loading screen. You can go to that city, you can go into those forests, you can go everywhere. And probably the most interesting part of this interview was this paragraph. The interviewer said, I was quick to joke that part of the trailer we paused on included the moon. So even if it was cool that we could reach the far off mountain and tower in the shot, saying we could go anywhere in the shot without a loading screen seemed like an exaggeration. But all Randy Pitchford had to say was everything in the scene, Jordan, everything in the scene. So basically what this paragraph is saying is that they joke that the moon is in that vista and that you probably wouldn't be able to go to the moon. But Randy Pitchford specifically says everything in that vista, in that scene of the trailer, you can explore without a loading screen. So you'll not only be able to explore everything on the planet, on the ground, seamlessly without a loading screen, you'll also be able to go up to the moon. And Randy Pitchford also talked about this in another interview with the Japanese website that I talked about in my previous video. Again, I'll have that linked in the description. You can just use Google Translate if you want to read it yourself. But they were asking Randy about a tweet he made that the world is completely seamless. And he again goes on to talk about this massive vista with everything in the background usually being skyboxes in a lot of games. But in Borderlands 4, all of those places you see are playable spaces with no loading. They're completely seamless. And again, he reiterates everything is completely explorable. And then in this interview, they also ask him about that, if he means everything on the ground or everything you could see in the sky. And he says yes. And then he goes on to also say that you mentioned the term open world, and he has to be a little bit careful about that because different games have their own definition of what open world means, and that many games fill their open worlds with systematic, algorithmically generated content. But in Borderlands 4, everything is created and placed by the staff at Gearbox. Everything in the environment, from the leaves to the characters, everything you encounter. So he says this is different from a lot of open worlds that are just created for a way to have a lot of space, or generally explaining that a lot of games can have a lot of open, empty spaces with not a lot of interesting things. And he says he doesn't want to give the wrong impression. Borderlands 4 is not an open world, but they're creating a seamless world, the largest world in the series by far. It's very big and there's a lot to do in it. Now, I think one of the big things they're trying to not do here is they're trying to not have you think of the worst open world games you can. Because if they just came out and said, this game is open world, Borderlands 4 is open world, a lot of people would probably think of like an Ubisoft game or the most generic, empty open world they could possibly think of. They'll think of Ubisoft games with just checklist objectives everywhere that are boring and kind of repeated over and over again, or some other super empty open world. They're trying to explain that while Borderlands 4 is completely seamless, it's still Borderlands. It's not going to be like empty. Everything you see is placed specifically by developers. It's still going to feel as packed, as filled with things as previous Borderlands games. It's not going to feel any less empty because it's seamless, but it's going to be much larger and completely seamless this time. I think that's the main reason they're not trying to call it an open world game, because they still want people to know that it's still Borderlands. It's still going to feel like Borderlands. It's just going to have a seamless world. And another developer goes on to give a little bit more information on what we can actually expect to run across within this new massive world of Borderlands 4. And this developer goes on to say, we want players to encounter a variety of dynamic content as they explore this world. So we are also focusing on that. Even if we go off on a tangent, there are various challenges like Borderlands 3, and thanks to technology such as Unreal 5, which this game is being developed on, we have been able to design each area with our own hands. And even though we have a world of this size, we are able to increase the things that players can do while exploring it and allow them to take on various events and activities. So again, they're trying to just reiterate that this world is going to be filled with a lot of the things you would expect from Borderlands, probably even more. And it's not going to be like some open world or some checklist game like you can see with some other open world games. Another pretty big important part is, in addition to that, we have added the ability to generate vehicles. We call them personal vehicles, and as you see in the video, you can call them at almost any time. It's useful when you easily want to go to a friend somewhere else. So this is another pretty big piece of information when it comes to having this massive seamless world, is that instead of needing to go to a specific area or a specific station to digi-struct your vehicle, you will have a personal vehicle that you can call pretty much anywhere. And obviously this would generally mean you're probably not going to be like inside of a building and calling your vehicle in there, but these are probably going to work in just a very similar way to Sparrows from Destiny or Destiny 2, where when you're outside, you're in these big areas, you can just call your Sparrow to you and get on your vehicle and be able to explore much more quickly. Also, the fact that they're going to personal vehicles makes it sound like you're probably going to have more options to customize it. And there may still also be the normal digi stations where you can just call different vehicles. Like maybe there's a handful of vehicles that you have to go to stations to get. Maybe those will have different weapons on them. And then maybe your personal vehicle is something different, but you'll still be able to get your personal vehicle at most areas. You can explore a massive world much more easily. So I think when you look at all of this information, Borderlands 4 is going to be pretty close to a fully open world game. Presumably there are still going to be different areas that may have a load screen, because as they're talking about this, one thing I noticed is that they say everything you can see, you can go explore. So you can go explore that massive tower in the distance, you can go explore even the moon, but they don't say everything in the game is seamless. So my idea for this is that probably you're going to be put down in this massive seamless world. You can go to the moon, anything you can go see, you can explore, but then there are probably going to be different areas you go into that do have loading screens that take you to a different area. And while this is going to be taking place in one place space or on one planet, even though we can go to the moon as well seamlessly, we don't actually know if there are still going to be different other zones that are split between a loading area like previous Borderlands games. Because if you go see this massivist and you can explore everything in it, you can't see the whole game there. So there may also just be other massive zones split off like you have in previous Borderlands games, or maybe this area has a specific boss or something like that. I would presume that's also another reason they're not calling it completely open world, because there's still probably going to be some different stuff divided by a load area or going into a different zone, but there's probably going to be a lot less of that. And as we went over, one of the big things they want to not do is have it like in Borderlands 3, where you're exploring these different planets. So you have to take a load screen to go to a different planet. If you want to go somewhere else on the planet, you have to take another load screen as well. If you get to the ending of a zone in another area, you have to go through another load screen. So there was a good amount of load screens in Borderlands 3. I think that's really something they want to cut back on or almost completely on in Borderlands 4. But that's pretty much all the information we have on the world and the seamlessness of Borderlands 4. Personally, for me, I am very excited for this. I like open world games generally more than I like really compartmentalized games, depending on the game, obviously. But I do like the direction Borderlands 4 is going into. It doesn't sound like it's completely open world, but it sounds like it is seamless enough to get that feel of a massive open world where you can go explore everything you can see, but still hopefully doesn't fall into a lot of the pitfalls that some open world games can fall into. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.